Once, Boeing was a symbol of excellence and innovation in aviation. It was setting the quality standards for commercial airplanes. It made some of the most iconic planes in history. It is one of the largest airplane manufacturers in the world to this day, and people even had a saying, "If it's not Boeing, I am not going." However, in the face of recent events, Boeing now stands accused of sacrificing safety for profit, and has now become an example of what happens when Wall Street executives take over large corporations. Boeing has been having safety issues for years now. Executives keep changing and people keep dying. So what exactly happened?
USA.
This is the scene of 8 Americans, 157 people killed in a plane crash.
On October 1st, 1881, William Edward Boeing was born in Detroit. In the early 1900s, William Boeing moved to Seattle and, just like his father, made his fortune mining timber. In January 1910, Boeing attended the first Los Angeles International Air Meet and developed a passion for aviation. On March 10th of the same year, William Boeing buys yacht customer Edward Heath's shipyard on the Duwamish River in Seattle. In January 1916, in his Lake Union boathouse, William Boeing began final assembly of the Boeing Model 1 seaplane. The plane is also known as the B&W, after its designers, William Boeing and George Conrad Westervelt. With each successive model, Boeing pushed the boundaries of technological advancement, culminating in the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress and B-29 Super Fortress, cornerstones of America's air power during World War II. During the post-war era, Boeing shifted its focus to commercial aviation. In the 1950s, Boeing introduced its groundbreaking Boeing 707 jetliner, a 4-engine airplane that made transatlantic flights popular. The 707 made its first flight in December 1957, and by August 15, 1958, Pan Am took delivery of the country's first commercial jetliner. This partnership began in the 1940s when Pan Am operated Boeing's Clipper flying boats, marking the start of a long and fruitful relationship. And in 1949,
Pan Am introduces the Boeing 377. 1958, Pan Am introduces the Boeing 707. 1969.
A spiral staircase. Very plush.
Hey, I think I've got it. It's a townhouse in New York, isn't it?
No. No, it's more like a chic new lounge.
No, it looks more like an ocean liner to me.
No, it's more like some grand hotel.
Yeah. Or maybe one of those restaurants that looks down on everything, you know?
Maybe it's some kind of movie theater.
Or some secluded rendezvous.
Very.
Pan Am introduces the incredible, the plane that's a ship, the ship that's a plane, the Boeing 747 Superjet. First takeoff December 1969 on the world's most experienced airline.
and just like that, Boeing solidified its dominance in the commercial aviation market.
Next, the proposed merger between the Boeing Corporation and McDonnell Douglas.
In December 1996, Boeing announced its intention to merge with McDonnell Douglas.
The merger of Boeing and McDonnell Douglas is now complete,
which was another major American aerospace manufacturer and defense contractor, which was formed by the merger of McDonnell Aircraft and Douglas Aircraft in 1967. It became known for producing commercial airliners like the DC-10 and military aircraft such as the F-15 Eagle. The company played a significant role in the aerospace industry. However, the corporate greed had always been a problem. For years, McDonnell Douglas had faced criticism from the public for prioritizing profit over safety, most notably with the flawed cargo door design on the DC-10, leading to several fatal crashes. Allegations of cutting corners and ignoring engineering warnings marked its reputation, contributing to its downfall in the 1990s, and later on, in 1997, resulted in a merger with Boeing being a surviving company, and this historic moment would mark the start of Boeing's downfall. In 2020, Quartz reported that after the merger, there was a clash of corporate cultures, where Boeing's engineers and McDonnell Douglas's bean counters went head-to-head, which the latter won, and that this may have contributed to the events leading up to the 737 MAX crisis. Today, the global aviation industry is defined by the fierce rivalry between its two main manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing. If one of the manufacturers introduces a superior aircraft, the other stands to lose a significant amount of money and a significant portion of the market. That is exactly what was about to happen when Airbus announced the re-engined A320neo, which featured a bigger engine and shark winglets, which made Airbus's new single-aisle airplane 15% more fuel efficient. And because the aircraft itself didn't receive much changes, pilots could operate new aircraft with little to no additional training, which meant that airlines could save a ton of money. This was a problem for Boeing. To compete with Airbus, Boeing also introduced its own AT winglets and fitted a bigger engine on their 737, which was a direct competitor to the A320, and called it 737 MAX. There was just one problem. If we have a look at the sketch of how the A320 and 737 look in profile, you will notice that the A320 is significantly taller. That's why Airbus was able to easily slide the new engine under the wing of their A320. Whereas for Boeing, there wasn't enough room under the wing of their 737. But Boeing did eventually find a way to fit the new engine on their 737, which was to move up the engine on the wing so that it would be slightly higher. It was looking good for Boeing, except there was a problem with moving up the engine on the wing. Whenever the 737 MAX was going for a takeoff, the nose tended to point too far upward, which could lead to a stall, because this new plane had to behave exactly like the old one. This was a big problem for Boeing, yet they managed to come up with a workaround. Instead of redesigning the whole aircraft, which would have been very costly, they came up with a software which they called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, and this software automatically pushed the nose downwards if the pilot flew the aircraft at too high of an angle. But because Boeing was selling the 737 MAX as pretty much the same plane as the 737, they did not highlight the new MCAS system. This meant that MCAS was not mentioned in the training materials. Moreover, some pilots even highlighted that they only got a 2-hour iPad course before entering the cockpit for the first time. And finally, in 2018, several pilots complained to the FAA that the 737 MAX suddenly began nosing down.
American pilots reportedly expressed concern about the Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet last year on at least 2 different occasions, saying that the plane tilted down.
On October 29, 2018, at 6:20 a.m., an aircraft took off from Jakarta and was scheduled to arrive in Pangkal Pinang at 7:20 a.m. However, from the beginning of the flight, the nose of the airplane kept diving down for short periods of time, which made the pilots very confused. The pilots had no idea that they were combating the MCAS system, and 22 miles into the flight crew had requested clearance to return to Jakarta Airport. Communication between air traffic control and Flight 610 was suddenly lost at 6:33 a.m. ATC informed the National Search and Rescue Agency, which deployed 3 ships and a helicopter to the area, and at 7:30 a.m., the agency received reports that Flight 610 had crashed 21 miles off the coast of the island of Java. 5 months later, another 737 MAX had a fatal crash. It was Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, which is Ethiopian Airlines' deadliest accident to date, as all 149 passengers and 8 crew members died. The crash occurred due to the MCAS malfunction, and reports show that the pilots did manage to turn off the MCAS, however it was already too late. In response, aviation regulators and airlines grounded all 737 MAX airplanes. In June 2020, the FAA Federal Aviation Administration, found several 737 MAX defects and found various instances where Boeing had violated the regulations. In September 2020, the US House of Representatives conducted its own investigation and found numerous instances where Boeing dismissed employee concerns with the 737 MAX MCAS system that caused 2 fatal accidents, prioritized budget constraints and deadline over safety, and lacked transparency in disclosing the essential information to the FAA. Furthermore, it found that the assumption that further pilot training would not be necessary had diminished safety and gave pilots zero chance to combat the MCAS during the 2 fatal crashes. Now, of course, all of this stained Boeing's reputation and gave them a lot of regulatory problems, so Boeing had to pay a couple of $100 million here and there. Their PR team had to do quite a bit of crisis management, and so on. But ultimately, this was just crisis management for them, as they even tried negotiating during trials, just like during this one.
Seal being lubricated with Dawn liquid dish soap and cleaned with a wet cheesecloth, and another was being checked with a hotel room key card. Does that sound like safety to you?
Senator, I think our relationship with that particular supplier has been well documented, reviewed by the FAA, and most certainly us. And
in March 2023, Boeing disputed in court filings that the victims of the Ethiopian Flight 302 did not experience horrific emotional distress, pain and suffering, and physical impact injury in the final 6 minutes as the plane was nosediving into the ground, citing, quote, speed of sound as a defense. After Boeing promised to improve safety, update the MCAS system, and tell airlines the full pilot training, the 737 MAX resumed its operation. However, on January 5, 2024, on Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, a door plug blowout occurred on the 737 MAX jetliner after the plane had reached an altitude of just over 16,000 feet. The aircraft made an emergency landing at Portland International Airport successfully, with several people on board injured, but luckily, there were no fatal consequences this time. The FAA immediately mandated inspections of all 737 MAX airplanes fitted with door plugs, thus grounding 171 aircraft. This could have been just an unlucky incident for Boeing. However, in reality, Boeing has had safety concerns reports from engineers and auditors for years at this point. So what actually caused Boeing's downfall? Well, you see, during the 90s, Boeing dominated the domestic market, and on a global scale had only Airbus to compete with. That's why after the merger with their rival company, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing no longer needed to stay on the cutting edge of innovation. That's why old Boeing executives who specialized in engineering were soon replaced with Wall Street types, and priorities of the company shifted from innovation and safety to money and efficiency. In the following years, Boeing's new management started spending billions of dollars on stock buybacks that would pump up their value to keep their shareholders and Wall Street happy. The same money that could have been spent to increase the safety of their aircrafts, the same money that could have been used to innovate or to raise salaries at their factories. Furthermore, to cut costs, Boeing's management decided to outsource roughly 70% of its manufacturing, engineering, and design, rather than rely on their experienced union workforce. To weaken its union, Boeing established an assembly line in South Carolina, a state well known for its anti-union stance. Executives allegedly directed managers to ensure no unionized employees there. In the later years, this pursuit of profit has led to significant quality control problems for Boeing. For instance, years before the 2 737 MAX aircrafts crashed, the US regulators found a pattern of recurring safety and manufacturing problems with the aerospace giant. For example, during a trip to Japan in 2015, the FAA auditor uncovered that Boeing's subcontractor was falsifying certifications on cargo doors for hundreds of 777 airplanes for years. Meanwhile, in the US, mechanics were leaving tools inside plane wings, dangerously close to the wires that were controlling the movements of these wings. Workers were also improperly installing wires in 787s, which heightens the risk of the shorts and fires.
I want to fly one of these planes because I see the quality going down.
Despite repeatedly identifying these safety lapses and Boeing's promises to address them, the company consistently failed to follow through. How? That's where corporate lobbying comes into play. Boeing has been consistently spending millions of dollars per year on lobbying to lower the safety standards. They have been paying millions in fines because it was still cheaper for them to pay these fines, rather than to re-engineer the aircraft or to fix the manufacturing issues. In 2008 and 2009, Boeing was second on the list of the top 100 US federal contractors, with contracts totaling US $22 billion and $23 billion respectively. From 1995 to early 2021, Boeing has agreed to pay a staggering $4.3 billion to settle 84 instances of misconduct. This includes a $615 million settlement for illegally hiring government officials and improperly using proprietary information in 2006. In 2007 and 2008, the company benefited from over $10 billion of long-term loan guarantees. From 2008 to 2010, Boeing spent $52.29 million on lobbying and did not pay any taxes during this period. Instead, they received $178 million in tax rebates, and despite making $9.7 billion in profits, Boeing laid off 14,862 workers since 2008 and increased executive pay by 31% to $41.9 million in 2010 for its top 5 executives. In 2013, Boeing secured the highest ever tax breaks at the state level. All of this has led to numerous safety problems in the modern day. In 2023 and 2024, there were many instances where Boeing had whistleblowers coming forward and expressing their concern with safety and corporate culture at Boeing. For example, in 2021, John Barnett complained that the company undermined his career for raising safety concerns, and in 2024, he was testifying against Boeing. However, in March 2024, he was found dead of a gunshot wound.
Aware of the death of a former Boeing employee turned whistleblower. 62-year-old John Barnett found dead on Friday from what the coroner calls an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Another Boeing whistleblower, Joshua Dean, a former quality auditor at Spirit Aerosystems, which is one of Boeing's suppliers, also raised concerns about suppliers ignoring production defects. However, he was also soon found dead from a mysterious infection, just 2 months after Barnett's death. And even with these mysterious deaths, on May 4th, the New York Post reported that Boeing now faces 10 more whistleblowers. This year alone, Boeing has already had at least 6 of their aircrafts fall apart in the sky, including the Alaska Airlines Flight 610. 2 whistleblowers were found dead. Another whistleblower accused Boeing of ignoring the safety issues, and another one has accused them of criminal cover-up of its safety issues. But beyond this one corporation, Boeing is actually a cautionary tale of what's wrong with modern multinational corporations. Monopolization, safety neglectance, the wealth spread to the rich shareholders, cutting corners on safety to save a dime, destroying workforce unions, all of this while at the same time spending big money to increase executive pay and lobby the government. Boeing is just an example of a systematic issue with many large corporations. The company's actions highlight how such entities often operate with a disturbing level of secrecy, shielded from public accountability and driven by profit margins rather than ethical considerations. This detachment and lack of responsibility leads to unethical practices that can endanger lives and tarnish the industries. We believe that the solution to these problems lies in reimagining corporate structures, and that's where the concept of decentralized autonomous organizations comes into play. This concept offers a paradigm shift where the corporation is inherently part of the society it serves. This integration fosters fairness, transparency, and collective responsibility, ensuring that the interests of the many outweigh the ambitions of the few. In simpler terms, imagine this. When you go to work, you own part of the company, just like all your colleagues, and all corporate operations are transparent. This way, you as a group of people will be united, and there will be no exploitation of your work, and you won't have to compete with your friends and colleagues to please some boss who only cares about profits and himself. Now, to briefly introduce our DAO that this YouTube channel aims to promote, we are a team of experienced geologists and miners who believe that the spread of wealth only to the top 1% is unfair. We believe that exploitation of third world countries for their cheap workforce and natural resources is unfair. We believe that we as regular people have been robbed of our right for natural resources by large corporations, and we believe that if we won't start implementing actually sustainable practices, not for the sake of pleasing the media, but to actually preserve natural habitats, we will soon face climate issues that we can't even imagine yet. To close this off, we want to tell you this fact. There are enough resources in this world for every single human being to be rich. So why do we have to put up with the fact that 40% of people in this world have no food, while the top 1% has more money and resources that is even possible to spend? If these ideas resonate with you in any way, shape or form, please join our community or just simply follow our socials. And if you like this video, make sure to click on the notification bell icon so you won't miss any future uploads from us.